welcome to episode 2 of season 2 of Burn the Talking Points. I'm Maryland Democratic Party Chair Stuart Pittman, and our topic today is ice. Not the kind of ice that we're trying to melt on the streets, but the kind of ice that comes from the federal government and has been invading communities around the country. And I've got some people here who have been working on this issue in the Maryland General Assembly. Local electeds have been working at the local level, including myself. But this year, the Maryland General Assembly has taken up a couple of bills that we're going to talk about. So my guests are Will Smith, who is the chair of the Judiciary in the Senate, Senator Will Smith, and then Delegate Nicole Williams, who is the chair of the Public Safety Subcommittee of the Judicial Committee in the House. And welcome, both of you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So let's start with, let's just jump right into the bills. So, Senator, you tell us about this mask bill that has been working its way through the system and why.
First, I want to say thank you for having us, and thank you to Delegate Williams for her leadership on the 287G program and in helping us steer through the masking bill in the Senate. In the Senate, we passed 2 bills. One was the 287G bill, which Delegate Williams will talk about, but the masking bill essentially does a couple of things. It requires the Maryland Police Training Standards Commission to develop a uniform policy that would be applicable to state and local law enforcement, as well as to federal ICE agents that operate within our jurisdiction. There are several exceptions for public safety, for health, for inclement weather, and things like that. But generally speaking, when you're operating as a law enforcement officer here in Maryland, the law of the land will be that you will not wear a mask unless one of those exclusions or exceptions applies. And we've done this for obvious reasons, because we've seen, obviously, across the country and across our state, masked agents dragging people out of cars, going into their homes without a judicial warrant, showing up on the perimeters of schools. That's happened several times in my jurisdiction, in my district at Blair High School. There have been several instances of ICE agents showing up. So we took these bold steps to make sure that any law enforcement officer operating in our state is not going to be unidentifiable and is not going to wear a mask unless those exceptions apply.
Have you ever heard of law enforcement in the state of Maryland, whether it's Maryland State Police or local, operating with masks other than during COVID?
It's a very good question, because that's why law enforcement really wasn't heavily opposed to the bill, because that's not part of their standard procedures. They don't operate with masks. They have clearly identifiable name tags or badge numbers, and they clearly identify the agency that they're operating with. So there's no reason to obscure your face. There's no reason to obscure your agency. You should also always have a warrant when you're going to pull someone out of their car, when you're going to detain someone, when you're pulling someone out of their private residence or a private space. You need a judicial warrant for those types of activity, and you should be clearly identifiable as law enforcement. If you're acting under the color of the law, do so lawfully. And so in Maryland now, no law enforcement officer is going to be masked unless one of those is.
So there was no opposition from local law enforcement.
They expressed concerns, but in terms of the basic tactics, law enforcement officers don't engage in those tactics.
Right.
You mentioned COVID. Obviously, people had masks for COVID. People have masks for inclement weather and other instances when they're doing certain operations. But generally speaking, when you're interfacing with the public, law enforcement doesn't do that, and neither should ICE.
Right. They're trained to build trust in the community, and you don't build trust easily with a mask on.
Exactly right. And in fact, it becomes dangerous for law enforcement when you have people that are running around unidentifiable, no markings on their uniforms and masked. That creates the prospect of a lot of people impersonating law enforcement. And it's a dangerous situation altogether. So for the safety of law enforcement and for the safety and the trust of our citizens and the communities that they serve, that's why we passed that piece of legislation.
Okay, so that's working its way through. Correct? It's not passed yet.
No, we've passed it out of the Senate. It's now in the House awaiting action. And
Okay. And Delegate, you can tell us about how that's going to proceed, but also let's jump to 287G, and then let's get to the big picture of the why and how public sentiment, how you all feel public sentiment is moving in this direction and all that. So tell us about 287G ban.
Yes. So both the House and the Senate just last week passed legislation to ban 287G agreements here in the state of Maryland. 287G agreements are simply voluntary agreements that local law enforcement can enter into with ICE. There's different types of models with regards to 287G agreements. In Maryland, we have some jurisdictions that have what's known as the jail-based model, and we also have some jurisdictions that have what's known as the warrant-based release bottle. And so with this legislation, it would ban all of those different types of models under the program. And it's emergency legislation. It didn't start off as an emergency, but really, given everything that we are seeing happening here in the state of Maryland and across the country, we thought it was imperative to enact this bill on an emergency basis. And so once it passes both chambers, it will go into effect immediately. It has to go to the governor's desk first, and then the governor will have 6 days in which to sign it, and then it will go into effect immediately. For those jurisdictions that currently do have these agreements, once the bill goes into effect, they will have to exercise immediately the termination clause within those agreements with ICE to terminate those agreements.
Well, I can tell you from experience, it's not hard to terminate the agreement, because when I was elected, we did it on practically day one. And it was implemented in the previous administrations. I'd only been there a couple of years. And I talked to we did it in the detention center. And I talked to some of the folks that were engaged. We were sending our staff who were overworked. We had a shortage of detention officers, down to, I can't remember, South Carolina, North Carolina, to an ICE training program. We were paying them while they did this. And then they would come back and then they would do ICE's work for them. The criminal alien program, I think we all know, is something that actually, apart from 287G, that all the counties do. So when folks are let out after they've been convicted of a crime, they get deported. ICE knows they're there. So this whole thing about this is about criminals just seems really strange to me.
Absolutely.
What kind of pushback have you gotten, either of you, from the public or from law enforcement?
Yeah, we heard from especially the jurisdictions that have these agreements in place. Their sheriffs did come and testify in opposition to the agreement. But I think the public sentiment is exactly what you stated, that you experienced there in Anne Arundel County, that with these agreements in place, they don't necessarily make our communities safer. When someone is arrested or detained, their fingerprints are run through the system, and ICE will be notified where they're located if there is an outstanding detention warrant for them. And so ICE has every right to come to the facility to pick up that individual when that individual is about to be released. And so that will take place regardless of whether these agreements exist or not.
And you are both attorneys, correct?
That's right.
Yeah. So this concept that ICE keeps saying that they're trying to get criminals off of our streets, is there a concern that if they pick up somebody who is a criminal, who should be convicted and serve time of a violent crime, that if they take them, send them across the border, they're just going to come back and do it again?
That's the principal point I argued on the floor, and you hit the nail on the head with that. And I appreciate the work you did. It served as an example and inspiration for us to do it at the state level. So thank you for that. But you brought up something called the Criminal Aliens Program, the CAP program.
Yeah.
Which is known. And one of the things that I brought up during our debate on the floor was that the 287G programs don't make our communities safer. Actually, I think they make them less safe, because they drive people away from law enforcement and participating with investigations and victims from reporting crime, things like that. No one wants to do that. But there's also the element of due process. When you're arrested, you are not convicted. It's a charge. And I preside over a committee that every year we are trying to balance and weigh. We create new crimes every year. We take crimes off the books every year. I know how many crimes there are and how many arrestable offenses there are on the books. It's not difficult depending on what shoes you walk in, it's not difficult to get arrested in the United States of America, okay? And an arrest is just a charge, not a conviction. And so to take someone out of the community, away from their family, away from their job, because someone has merely been accused of something without having been convicted, is a very important point to make. The CAP program goes after folks after they've been convicted.
Right.
And then there's the other element of the Fourth Amendment, which is if someone is to be released to the community, you can't hold them under a ICE detainer, which is an administrative warrant, not a judicial warrant. And so there are Fourth Amendment violations in play as well. So lack of due process, Fourth Amendment violations, driving people away from participation with law enforcement. These programs make our communities less safe, and I'm glad we've gotten rid of them in Maryland.
Yeah. And I also just want to add the individuals who a lot of times are being picked up who have these detainers. The crimes that they are being arrested for are usually low-level offenses, usually misdemeanors. They're not capturing the worst of the worst. I think they say about 80% of the crimes that these individuals are being charged with are low-level crimes. And so when folks say that they meet
like
traffic violations, right, or loitering,
those headlight that's got a bulb out.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. And so when you say that these programs are necessary in order to capture the worst of the worst, the numbers, the data just doesn't really show that. And a lot of times these individuals are acquitted of the crimes that they are being charged for.
Right. And okay. So part of the reason we're even doing this episode about this is that when the Democratic Party went around to all 23 counties and Baltimore City with the central committees and did these town halls to talk back to her, the one issue that I think every single time somebody came to talk about, or a group of people, was the 287G program. And you wouldn't think something as arcane as, 287G, which most people don't know what it is, would be mobilizing that many people. And I think part of it was that last year, it came before the General Assembly. It didn't make it through, and folks wanted to make sure it did. What's different last year from this year in terms of whether the public or in the General Assembly?
I can speak from the perspective of the Senate. I mean, one of the apprehension in the Senate was what do you think was going to happen in response to us passing legislation like this? I've always said, I've been clear and consistent in this. We should always enshrine our values into law and into the Constitution when necessary, because we are dealing with an asymmetric actor in the White House. And so if you can't predict what's going to happen at the federal level, what you need to do is ensure that you live up to your values here in the state of Maryland. So I've always been clear and consistent on that. But the apprehension amongst a lot of Marylanders was that what would happen if we were to do something like this? And would SNAP funding be cut? Would Medicaid be cut? Would the money for the Francis Scott Key Bridge be cut? Would other community development block grant money be cut? Would federal jobs be cut? Well, guess what? All that happened, and you saw ICE turned into a paramilitary force going into our communities, terrorizing our communities. Ripping people out of cars, going into their houses without warrants, making people afraid to go to school or to the grocery store or to get medical treatment. And you saw all those things play out. And then you saw people get shot, people for peacefully protesting, for exercising their First Amendment rights and even their Second Amendment rights, getting shot and killed. And even here in Maryland, and our jurisdictions are abut each other, but right on in here, you saw an ICE officer, Montgomery and Prince George's, wield a firearm while trying to apprehend someone. And it has just pointing a firearm into the public space, completely untrained for the situation that person was in. And when you see those things, people have likened this to their Edmund Pettus moment, where you finally see things that people have been talking about for years are finally flighting up to social media and the national media, and you can't ignore it. And I think
right here in Glen Burnie and Anne Arundel, shot through the windshield. We don't know what happened because there were no cameras there.
Exactly right.
We know that ICE lied about who was in the vehicle.
And it changed the story after.
Who knows what else they changed?
That's exactly right. So I think all of those things, the apprehension was coming from a place of actual, care and love for our American community. And then once you saw all these things happen, all the funding, all the resources, the asymmetric manner in which this president acts, and our Edmund Pettus moments over and over again, I think that changes sentiment. And when you have that politics meet the policy, I think you can have some special things happen. And that's what we've done in the first few weeks of session here.
Is that what you experienced too?
Yeah, absolutely. The situation that you described with the gentleman who was just wielding the gun, to the general public, that happened in my district. It happened right down the street from an elementary school in my district. Parents witnessed that as they were walking their children to school that morning. And so when you have these situations and these instances that are just simply horrific and really create terror within your community, I think the sense that something has to be done just became even greater with the these visual instances that we saw.
Yeah. So when we look at the whole country and the politics of this, it seems that Trump was elected in part on his stance on immigration on the border. people obviously didn't expect troops to be taking over cities, and he said he was going after criminals. When Senator Van Hollen decided to go to El Salvador and go to that prison and try to get a man taken out who shouldn't have been sent there, brought back to Maryland, a lot of Democratic leaders, and I think Gavin Newsom even said publicly that it's not a winning issue for Democrats. We shouldn't be talking about immigration. He was told he shouldn't go. He went anyway. You think he did the right thing?
Absolutely.
100%. Yeah.
Right. He's our guy right here.
Yeah, but he understood the importance of that. There was a Marylander who was basically kidnapped by the federal government and taken away from his family, ripped apart from his family and his friends and his loved ones. And thank goodness that Senator Van Hollen understood the significance of that moment. We were talking about due process, and the fact that this gentleman did not receive due process under our laws is something that we, have all taken an oath to uphold. And I think the senator understood that in that moment and felt that even though politically, was advised it's not a good political thing to do, the right thing is the right thing to do regardless.
And he made it politically the right thing to do. Look at what the numbers are now. And I think some people I believe that immigration is the issue, and the way that they've handled it, the way that they've been so inhumane and cruel, potentially is what takes this Republican administration down.
I thought it was an important move for him to do that because it distilled two important principles that we stand on as a party and as Americans. One was that the humanitarian piece, you saw family being ripped apart. You saw that was the real human story there, but then you blend it. We're coming up on the 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence, the mission statement of our country, and the 14th Amendment we talk about for due process and equal protection. No matter who you are, if you're here in the United States, you're here in Maryland, you are afforded those constitutional rights. And it blended those two things together. And I thought it was a very, very important message for us here in Maryland to understand, but also for the nation. And I thought he did a fantastic job and a real example of public service and distilling those two core principles that we stand for.
So we have in the Maryland General Assembly Latino caucus, correct?
Yes.
I spoke to them the other day, and what else is on the agenda, do you think, either to deal with ICE or just to uplift our immigrant neighbors and as a political party for the Democratic Party, the way I see it is to move the body politic so that we move from this anti-immigrant attitude to recognizing folks as neighbors and good for the economy and all of those things. Are there other things in the General Assembly that are percolating that we should know about?
One thing that comes to mind immediately is that because we have passed something called dignity, not detention, where we said our jails and our local jails and our prisons will not be used to hold people who are going through those deportation proceedings. The federal government is looking for space in our state to build detention centers. And you've seen a little bit of what's been going on in Baltimore City in that detention center. So if you want to see the human rights violations, and I'm not being hyperbolic there, those are human rights violations that are happening every single day in Baltimore City in a federal facility. They want to build more. And so we've got legislation working through. I know the speaker's leading it, and we'll be working on some things in the Senate as well to make sure that we do whatever we can to prevent those facilities from being built and operated in the state of Maryland. One thing to point out is a number of these things, the government will contract out to a private prison industry. So we don't have any private prisons in Maryland.
Good reason.
It's a damn good reason.
Yeah.
And we certainly don't want to start now under these conditions. So we're going to be moving forward with that. But largely speaking, the whole narrative of just making sure that we're a welcoming place where immigrants feel welcomed and appreciated, and as members of our family and the fabric of our community, I think that's a message that we're going to continue to hit on. And I think these bold legislative measures just reinforce our commitment to making sure that Maryland is an open, welcoming place for everybody.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're looking at that because it may mostly be a local land use issue. And our friend Calvin Ball, Howard County Executive, they had a facility sort of slip through the cracks of their system. They got their permit. They actually built the place out, but he was able to stop it. Right. They'll probably end up in court. We'll see. But so I immediately went to our planning and zoning folks and said, is this an allowable use? I mean, it shouldn't be. If it's not, let's do legislation to make it not. Turns out it's not an allowable use in code. So but we're going to keep an eye out to see if any come through. But from a public safety perspective, having privately run, there's a reason why detention centers are run by the government, and to have these yahoos coming in here and creating, it's a public safety threat. You could have uprisings, you could have breakouts, you could have all kinds of things that result from the poor management of these things. So, any help you can provide to the locals with
we will do it.
Speaking as county executive, to stop these, and we know that there's ungodly amounts of money from the big beautiful bill, right?
Yes,
that is to hire new ICE agents and build centers.
The amount of money DHS received with the last budget, I think, is more than the entire budget of the state of Maryland. And so we're talking billions and billions of dollars. I think over $72 billion.
So there's another bill, isn't there, that is to prevent folks that are being hired right now by the Trump administration as ICE agents from then going and working for Maryland State Police? Or is that
was Delegate Wafo's bill?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, I remember hearing about that one. Okay.
Yeah. So
because we at the local level have been thinking about whether something like that should I shudder to think, because we know what they're trained to do. These new folks, especially, we know what they're trained to do. They're trained to escalate rather than de-escalate. We hire people in police to de-escalate. I can't imagine retraining those folks.
Yeah. And also, too, I think the type of training that the ICE agents receive is much different than the training that local law enforcement receives. So just the duration of the amount of training. I know in Anne Arundel County and Prince George's County, our officers are in the academy for months before they graduate and before they're considered to be, official officers, sworn duty officers, versus the amount of training that I think the ICE officers receive does not rise to that same level and that same standard. And so I think that's part of the problem, and part of why we're seeing the instances that we're seeing, because this is sort of what they're doing is outside of the scope of what they were originally trained to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Scary stuff. There was a great SNL skit about it, but I won't get into that. Meeting with a bunch of ICE folks. So before we end, I just want to ask you if there are other things, since we have you here in your committees that you all are working on, that you want to share with our audience. It doesn't have to be ICE related, anything.
Sure. Well, we moved on the immigration stuff quickly because it's critically important for us in this moment. So I'm glad.
Bill 1, right?
Yeah, it's Senate Bill number 1. One thing that I'm really excited about is youth charges adults. So juvenile justice reform, understanding that we can do business a little bit better in Maryland to have better public safety outcomes and better outcomes for our young children. Maryland charges more youths as adults than any other state except for Alabama per capita. 9 out of 10 are children of color, 8 out of 10 are African-American children. What happens when you charge automatically as adults, you're going to put them in a place where they're not going to have access to education, access to services so that they don't recidivate. And we're spending tens of $millions every year. So one of my priorities is to make sure that we continue that reform so we get better public safety outcomes for our children, better public safety outcomes for our communities. We save that money, we reinvest it into deterrence and into treatment. It's just, if you operated any other element of government like this or any other private sector, your board of directors and your shareholders say, you need to go ahead and fix that. We got to do better, and I hope we do this session.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent.
That work.
Today, we have Moms Demand Action here in Annapolis. This is their annual advocacy day. There's a bill that is going to be heard actually in the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee this afternoon. That's being sponsored by Senator Sarah Love. I'm the cross-file sponsor on the House side of this legislation with regards to what we call do-it-yourself machine guns. And it is really banning the sale and manufacturing of pistols, of handheld guns that are converted into automatic pistols by the use of a small little auto sear the size of a quarter, known as Glock switches. These are little devices that you can purchase really just off the internet for $25, or you can make them with a 3D printer. And we have seen the use of these switches just really being used by everyday criminals within our communities because they're so easy to get, they're so easy to use, and once they're attached to the handgun, it causes the gun to fire around 1,200 rounds of ammunition per minute. And so there is legislation. We have a legislation pending. There's also a lawsuit that is pending that was filed last year by our Attorney General here in Maryland and Baltimore City against Glock and other manufacturers that manufacture their handguns in a way that allows for these types of switches and auto sears to be attached to their guns. And so this legislation will ban the sale and manufacturing of those guns here in the state of Maryland until they actually decide to modify their design. If we had a vehicle with a seatbelt that was defective, we would say you had to recall that automobile. And so what we're proposing is you need to do the same thing here in the state of Maryland with handguns. There are lots of other manufacturers that do design their handguns in a way that prevents these switches from being attached to there. So we're not banning handguns here in the state of Maryland. We're just stating that there's a strict liability that you need to adhere to in the design and manufacturing of your guns.
Yeah, and if the NRA were still a gun safety organization like it was originally, they'd be all for it. Well, thank you for doing that work as well. And thank you for being on Burn the Talking Points. The idea is just to talk about what's going on, talk freely, talk openly. I hope this has been helpful. Anything I've missed? Anything anybody wants to say before we...
No, you're good. You got it. This is great. This has been really great. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for your service. You all are doing exactly the work that we've been hearing about all around the state people want done, standing up for justice and in your judicial committees. So thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Burn the Talking Points. I am so glad that we have such good people representing us and fighting back to win against this assault by ICE in Maryland. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share this with your friends.